territorial.
Your address for sport.
Yeah, girls have been working really well, so there's a long way to go. But yeah, we're progressing each day, getting better, and that's all you can do, just get better each day. So I'm really proud of the girls and the effort they're putting in. They've got an open mind to come to training and learn new things and approach cricket differently, which I'm very proud of them, and it's been great working with them.
Your address for culture.
Life is about balance. We have to also have the positive with the negative. And where the positive exists, we have to take time to celebrate. So even as we have so many of our young people being impacted negatively by this culture of violence, in the next few days, we are going to see hundreds of them playing their drum, dancing, learning to walk on stilts, playing the pan.
Your address for news.
Joe Biden's legacy of accomplishment over the past 3 years is unmatched in modern history. In one term, he has already, yes, you may clap. In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office.
Talk City 91.1 FM. Your address for talk.
All right, my friends, you are listening to Talk City 91.1 FM, your address for talk. And let us try to connect with the Indaba committee once again. Good night, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening, Nelly. Good evening to our listeners and our viewers live. We are on live. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. This is Indaba, the program of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. We are live on Talk City 91.1 FM and also on Facebook and YouTube. As usual, we have a lively program on for you tonight, but we have to welcome especially our new permanent co-host, Renée Francois. Welcome, Renée. As well, Renée has always been on the show. Yes, she is our technical expert behind the scenes. Of course, without her, we would have no show. But she has moved from background to the front of the program. Now she's now a face on the program, and we welcome her from this evening. She'll be a regular feature on Indaba. This evening, we are going to have the Africa report as usual. We are looking at South Africa, a situation that we touched on last week in our roundup of events on the continent. We are going to have a review of what's going on in Venezuela by our special elections overseer, none other than co-host Mr. Shabaka Kambon. And then we are going to have a feature discussion on decolonization in the Caribbean. And we are looking at the case of the Dutch-ruled territories. I hesitate to call them colonies, as you would see on your flyer, because the constitutional statuses could be very baffling, at least to me. But we do have a special guest from one of these territories on. We will introduce her later, or is she coming on now? We will introduce her later. So we are going to save that introduction when she comes on. Good evening once again. Welcome to the program. And we are going to take on the Africa report. Renée, could you bring up the report, please?
I stand before you to accept the decision of the Deputy President of the EFF.
That's Julius Malema, President of South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party. Welcome back to the Africa Report, in which we will do a roundup of some of the major news and developments since our last edition on the 26th of June. But first, I want to pay tribute to the great nation of Haiti, the first country in the
versus Floyd Shivambu is not the political battle we were expecting in 2024.
Mkondo Wesizwe is the final answer of the problems of our country.
As promised in our last edition, this week's focus of the Africa Report is on the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, the EFF, putting into perspective the shock resignation of its deputy president, Floyd Shivambu, as a member of the party and a member of parliament.
My sincere plea is that in its reflection of the decision that I have taken, the organization should also avoid mischaracterization of an otherwise revolutionary and disciplined decision to not renew membership of the EFF.
Malema and Shivambu, president and deputy president, often acclaimed publicly that they were brothers, not just comrades. Even at the press conference on Thursday, 15th August, to publicize the resignation, Malema still avowed that Shivambu remained his political sibling and that the door remained open for Shivambu's return to the EFF.
When he sent me a letter yesterday, I felt the same pain when I received the news of the passing away of my mother. Because Floyd, to me, is not just a comrade. Is a brother, and he will remain a brother even when he pursues his political career differently.
Some events are better understood by going back to the beginning. So let's take a quick look at the foundation of the EFF. Malema began doing political work for the ANC at the age of 6 years. At 14, he became an official member of the ANC's Youth League, rising through the ranks to become its president from 2008 to 2012, serving mostly under President Jacob Zuma. Before long, Malema transformed from being the principal propagandist for ANC officials to a bitter critic of the party's leadership, especially President Zuma. In 2011, Malema began to campaign vigorously for the ANC to remove Zuma from the position of president of the ANC, which, according to ANC practice, meant that he could no longer serve as the country's president. Zuma's supporters, however, turned the tables on Malema, charged him before the party's discipline committee, and expelled him in April 2012. The turning point for Malema and Shivambu was the massacre by police of 34 black miners at Amarachiana in August 2012. Shivambu responded to the plight of the miners who had no recourse to institutional justice.
Then on the 17th of August, immediately the next day, the next morning, I went to Amarachiana with Magaga and Andapiti.
Soon after, the workers invited Malema to meet with them.
Marigana happens, I'm in Polokwane. The workers say, where is that guy? We need that guy to come and listen to us.
Both Shivambu and Malema blamed Zuma for the crime against the miners and reiterated a call for him to step down. This was the political context and the atmosphere in which the EFF was born and which cemented the brotherly bond between Malema and Shivambu. From their first elections in 2014, EFF's political star was always rising. By 2023, after 10 years of existence, the EFF was at its strongest, occupying 44 seats in the National Assembly and many seats at provincial level. The next step was to defeat the ANC, but out of the political opposition shadows, Zuma re-emerged in December 2023 to become the fly in Malema's ointment once again. It was Zuma's MK that became the biggest threat to the ANC, displacing the EFF as the third force in South African electoral politics. The dog-eat-dog negotiations that followed the electoral debacle of the ANC and the decline of seats in the EFF exposed the weakness in Malema's stranglehold on the party. Shivambu's defection to MK, however, shook the very foundation of the EFF edifice, and Malema did not immediately know how to repair the damage. The scene of the press conference to announce Shivambu's resignation was political theater. Shivambu had submitted his resignation letter to Malema the day before, so there was no logical reason for both leaders to be on the same stage. The scriptwriter did a great job. They put on a good show, but the optics exposed their discomfort. It was evident from Malema's facial expression and Shivambu's constant sipping of water that all was not well. Political analysts found great difficulty in explaining Malema's extraordinary calm and uncharacteristic statesmanship. They did not have long to wait to see the
versus Floyd Shivambu is not the political battle we were expecting in 2024.
Mkondo Wesizwe is the GTU, and all those who served in the GTU under the deputy president are dissolved. You want to deploy anyone into the government on behalf of the EFF, you shall report to the office of the president. We are taking charge of our organization now. We are tired of entrusting in the hands of wrong people. We've been betrayed for too long. We've been sold out for too long. We've been trusting for too long. We need to take it into our hands and run it ourselves.
Shivambu's trading of his Sankara red beret for MK's camouflage cap was Zuma's revenge against Malema, and he immediately set about to restructure MK, setting it on a trajectory to ultimately take back the presidency. He did not only welcome Shivambu, but gave him the most important portfolio, that of national organizer, responsible for driving the party's programs, including drafting party policies and building nationwide structures. At the press conference called to announce the new MK, Shivambu was compelled to respond to Malema.
It's a genuine political discussion, which all South Africans must enter into, those who are in favor of the revolution. Because revolution is the content of what we're standing for. It's not just, no, if it's me, you are betraying me. You know, some people will say, you are betraying me. Where does that enter? And you don't even once suggest that I'm betraying the revolution. I will never betray the revolution. Because we're not in the business of trying to please each other's egos here. We're in the business of building a revolutionary movement that is going to emancipate the black majority and Africans in particular, and we're unapologetic about that. That is what we stand for.
Interestingly, both Malema and Shivambu declare that their true loyalty is to the revolution alone, the revolution that was declared when MK was launched in 1961. Both also declare their commitment to uniting the progressive forces under a single black caucus.
Twitter is going to tell us to abandon the progressive caucus. But let me tell you, we are not in alliance with MK. We have nothing to do with MK. What MK does is none of our business.
We disagree with MK. We are going to contest MK. We are going to say what we want to say and how we feel about MK. But when we arrive in Parliament, the progressive must unite against the GNU of the racist DA and the Freedom Front Plus.
Perhaps what South Africa is witnessing is not the collapse of black power, but the Big Bang that would create a new ethos of unity for the liberation of South Africa from the stranglehold of white capitalism and internal neocolonialism.
Yes, so that's the Africa report. We had a little technical glitch at somewhere around the middle, but I think Rene overcame that problem, so thank you, Rene. To me, what is happening in South Africa right now puts South Africa at its most important juncture since the end of apartheid in 1994. What we are witnessing is the imperative for the emancipation of Africa, as Shivambu expressed it. And the others like Malema talk about the liberation of Africa as well, the bringing together of the progressive forces. But what we are really talking about is decolonization, you know, and I'm saying so in the context of the discussion we are going to have later. This is about decolonization in South Africa. Apartheid was a system of internal colonization, meaning the colonization by a settler group of imperialists. That is the people that were called Boers and who call themselves Afrikaners now. It's a system of internal colonization. They appropriated 87% of the land. Very little of that has been handed back. They are still in control of the economy. They are still in control of all the productive forces, the land, the majority of the productive land, and so on. So what we do have is internal colonization. And the struggle is about decolonization or emancipation or liberation, however you put it. But it will determine whatever happens, whatever the outcome from the struggles, which really might be trying to find a way around the problem of the elections, because essentially it came out of the elections where the ANC technically lost the elections, but bounced back to command almost all of the important posts together with the former apartheid-dominated party called the DA today, right? But the vast majority of the people who control the DA were also the controllers of the apartheid system, and they do control the economy, the land, and so on. So that is the situation there. I don't know if Rene, you would like to make a comment on the Africa report? And is Shabaka joining us at all?
I believe Shabaka is ready to join us.
Yes, I have to apologize. I'm joining you tonight from the car on the road. We have just left the national consultation on monuments.
Great, great, great. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that as well. Yes. Yeah, so, Rene, would you like to comment a little bit before we bring Shabaka on?
Yeah. Just one statement. I think it was a little bit disappointing that Julius Malema didn't. I can't say that I did expect him and his party to win outright, but just disappointing that that wasn't the case, really. Yeah.
Well, I don't think he expected to win actually, but he expected to do a lot better.
Yeah.
He would have done better. He would have done better if not for Mkunto. He would have done much, much better than he actually did in the election. But now, the challenge now is how do they collaborate in order to ensure that the progressive forces are not further weakened and undermined. So that is the big challenge for them now. And they are the ones who can do something about it, nobody else. So, Shabaka, could you tell us, would you want to start up with Venezuela as advertised, or tell us a little bit about some of the highlights of the meeting today?
Yeah, I think I just have to say something about the consultation, as it begun. First of all, I think everybody would be relieved to know that I think the majority of respondents in the session today were in support of change. Unfortunately, the colonial epistemic violence represented by monuments to Christopher Columbus and Picton and the coat of arms was on full display. And so a gentleman describing himself as Portuguese from Belmont literally told the chairman of the Emancipation Support Committee to go back to Africa as she was making her comments. He felt entitled to be very racist and rude to her. And of course, when he took the mic, I'm surprised that, many people were surprised that he wasn't entirely kicked out. When he took the microphone, he went one step further to sort of restate all the ideas, all the stereotypes about indigenous people that come with the Columbus hero myth. And of course, he was defending Christopher Columbus. So it was very interesting to see him defending the monument and restating all the various racial stereotypes about indigenous people that are present in the myth. So he told Chief Barat, for example, that his people were savages and that they were constantly fighting each other, warring with each other. And so what was Columbus wasn't wrong for dealing with them, but then at the same time saying that it was not Columbus who was responsible for the genocide, but the prisoners who came with him, the vile men who came with him, who started killing and pillaging, and so it wasn't Columbus. So he restated all the ideas. Interestingly enough, I thought to myself as I was sitting there that I think Chief Barat got a good explanation. I could not have explained to him better why it was important all these years to have come on board with us in the Caribbean Freedom Project and called on the government to remove Columbus. He was one of the people who had, most vociferously took opposition to opposition on the matter.
But is he explicitly, Shabaka, is he explicitly in support of the campaign to remove Columbus now?
Well, his a representative of the First Peoples of Arima got up and said the way they put it is that it is exactly the way he put it to us when we were meeting with him back in 2017, 2018, that they have no problem with the removal. So it was kind of poetic justice in a kind of strange way that a person describing themselves as Portuguese would get up and tell the chief of the indigenous people that his people were warlike savages, and that it was just a few of them scattered across the Caribbean, moving from here to there, and so on. All the stuff that is part and parcel of the Columbus hero myth, all those horrendous ideas, Caribs, cannibals, all those ideas were in his discourse. So I thought that was, in a sense, a kind of unfortunate, racist, but in a sense, a kind of poetic, the circle coming back around, in a sense, So I think that, but of course, there's no excusing the level of racism. And of course, there was also a commentator, an African commentator, who was very much in support of keeping the monuments and so on, regurgitating another one of those kinds of feel-good ideas that we would have, philosophical ways to approach the future that we would have gotten somewhere around independence, which states that, for bad, for good, for worse, we're all here now, and so we should just embrace all of our history.
But Shabaka, besides the activist groups, including ourselves, which new voices did you hear, prominent new voices or otherwise, coming forward to support the decolonization of public spaces? What are the new voices you were hearing there today?
One of the new voices was a Woodbrook Residents Committee. The Woodbrook Residents Committee came forward and said that it was time to remove that memorial to the Boer War generals, British Boer War generals. And they wanted them replaced with the people who had distinguished themselves from the community of Woodbrook. So all those street names, Bullock, Kitchener, etc., which are named after British Boer War generals, and even I think a private is in there as well. They wanted those names removed from the streets, and those streets now used to honor distinguished residents of Woodbrook. Brother Victor Rubadiri also made a very interesting contribution, stating that the colonials placed these people on the streets, on monuments and statues and so on in front of us, because he said they were about the crimes that these people were committing. They distinguished themselves in ways that the colonials felt was appropriate. So they were leaders in genocide and enslavement and so on. And he said that we now, he told the audience, we are now an independent people constructing a new civilization. We're not about those things. So, of course, we can't continue to celebrate and glorify them. There were some other individuals. The mayor of Port of Spain came forward early on to say that whatever was discussed, he would be willing to move on it in short measure. So he was committing his organization to move the process forward once the consensus had been arrived at. So it was interesting.
Brother Reddock and
Dr. Reddock and brother. What's his name?
That's interesting because I was saying, Shabaka, that's interesting of the mayor because his predecessor would have removed himself from the responsibility to correct that problem with the Columbus statute. So that's important that this current mayor is saying that he would take that responsibility as the responsibility of the city mayor. Shabaka, as somebody living in the rural areas, we are hearing only the urban voices so far. Were there people from outside of the city centers, from far-flung areas that came to the consultation and expressed any sentiments even about places close to where they may be residing? For example, we have Picton Street and all over the place, and some of these names that we are campaigning about also, are replicated in the countryside as well. Were there any voices that we can say were non-urban voices coming to the consultation?
There was a gentleman from, it might have been somewhere in the east, maybe Sandy Grande, who said that there was a Woodford Street in the east, in Arima. He was from Arima, and he said there was a Woodford Street in Arima. What's his name? Eric Lewis came up from Maruga. And of course, I think Eric might have been the most radical commentator today. Very interesting. He called for the renaming of Port of Spain, the city itself.
Columbus Channel.
And the Columbus Channel out in South Trinidad to the Orinoco Channel. So I think, Eric Lewis to Maruga might have made perhaps the most radical suggestions to the committee today.
Great. I think I'm hearing Victor's voice in the background there.
Yes, Brother Victor is with me, assisting me with the camera in the car.
Okay. Greetings, my brother. Greetings. And of course, we appreciate your input in this important venture, decolonizing of this country. We are at the lotto break. I understand that when I can't check those things on my phone, I'm not on my PC this evening, so you would have to let us know what's going on with the studio.
Right, so they've just gone to their lotto break. And I think we can go ahead and start our segment with Dr. Rhoda Arundel. I'm very excited to hear.
Well, let's give Shabaka an opportunity to wrap up what he's saying there, and then, of course, the lotto break might be over, so people would hear the beginning of Dr. Arundel's contribution on the interview. Yeah, Shabaka, could you just wrap up the talk there with us, and we are going to go on to our interview.
All right. Well, what I just want to say then is, in terms of those who came to the program today to hear what's happening in Venezuela, let me just say that I think that progressive forces around the world are now waiting on the government of Venezuela to publish a more detailed summary of the results, which would then end all the speculation. This goes beyond speculation, which would dampen the kind of the attempt at regime change that is taking place in that country. So the Supreme Court has made its statement. The electoral authority has declared President Maduro the winner. The Supreme Court has said that has upheld that ruling, and now I think the onus would be on the government to publish the detailed findings, and that, I think, it wouldn't put an end to the attempts at regime change, but it would certainly dampen the enthusiasm for for regime change in the international community.
Okay, so thank you, Shabaka, and we can continue that conversation next week when hopefully you are in studio. When you are perhaps better positioned to take in the program. Where you are now is not the best for.
Yes,
for
I'm going to sign out, brother and sister, and we're listening on the radio.
Okay, would you be coming back in?
If I get to a space where I could come back in on time properly.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay.
I'm looking forward to hearing our dear friend.
Yes, great. Okay. So with that in mind, I believe that we might be back live on Talk City 91.1 FM, I'm presuming so. So I want to especially welcome our guest for this evening's program, Dr. Rhoda Arundel. Dr. Arundel, welcome to Indaba.
Good evening.
Knowledge Growth.
Yes, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, good evening to you and your team and your audience. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. And I'm listening here and enjoying every minute so far. Thank you.
Right. We are honored to have you on the program. Dr. Arundel is a human rights activist, an author, and a lecturer. She is the president of One St. Martin. St. Martin is, of course, in the Caribbean, for those of you who might be a little bit hazy with your geography. She is the president of One St. Martin and the current president of the Caribbean Studies Association, which is an academic association. From 2010 to 2012, she served as St. Martin's first Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, and Youth Affairs in the UPDP coalition government, and she currently teaches at Howard University in the United States. Right, so that is a brief bio. Of course, I know Dr. Arundel's bio can go on much longer than that. Of course, she has published quite a lot and all of that. So you do have her picture. She is an activist. She's very much involved in the reparations movement. And the topic we are going to be discussing, as I said earlier, it is about decolonization in the Dutch territories. And we are going to make the link with reparations and see how that fits into the broader issue of reparations. And of course, the reparations movement is very much alive and getting stronger every day. So could we begin, Dr. Arundel, by explaining the status, the constitutional status of these territories? Should we call them colonies? Should we call them something else? What are they and how did they get to be what they are now? Could you explain that for our listeners?
That's a beautiful question because we've just had election about a week ago, and I'll explain to you why the terminology sounds confusing, but it's really not. We are a colony by every definition of the word, but we are referred to constitutionally. First of all, within the kingdom, they often refer to these islands, Aruba, Curacao, and Saint Martin, as autonomous countries within the kingdom. And at the same time, politically speaking, we've had scholars define it as, what do they call it? Constituent states within the kingdom. They're all fancy terminology to say pretty much we are a colony. We are colonized by the Netherlands. And in the case of St. Martin, it is the Netherlands and France. So you have two parts of the island that are colonized by two European forces. And why do I say this? We've just had an election on Monday where you are being asked to elect people to parliament. But in our system, our parliament is not really the highest body. It is a parliament, yes. And then the governing coalition would have to nominate the candidate ministers. They're not even called ministers. They're called candidate ministers. Because
just to interject a little so that we can follow you more clearly. Is it the Parliament of St. Martin or the Parliament of the Netherlands?
It's the Parliament of St. Martin, right? But and oftentimes you would think that the Parliament is the highest body, right? The people have chosen, this is their will, etc. But even after our Parliament has been selected, so there are 15 candidates for 15 seats, and whoever forms the majority government, they get to nominate the ministers. But they will never become ministers unless they are screened. And that screening is done by the prosecutor's office, controlled by the Netherlands, the Secret Service, controlled by the Netherlands, and then the governor has to sign off. And when the governor signs the decree, then can that person be officially nominated a minister. So to say it's not a colony is a little stretch, because every way it behaves everything like a colony. Even when the budget, the national budget is approved by Parliament, it cannot be passed unless there's a committee for financial supervision, which was put in place by the Netherlands, and the island supposedly agreed to when they attained this new status in 2010, and that same government that you mentioned that I was part of. So there's this thing called the Committee for Financial Supervision, which also must approve your budget in order for it to be passed. So to say it's not a colony is a far stretch. It can be called whatever name it is, but it is a colony.
Great. Okay. Now let me ask you this question. Colonization breeds nationalist movements. Naturally, they go hand in hand. So what is the nature of the nationalist movement in St. Martin? And is there any collaboration or cooperation, if one exists, with the nationalists of the French sector of St. Martin? And also, what is the link or connection with the nationalists of the southern Dutch colonies, Curacao, Bonaire, Aruba, and so on? What is the nature of the nationalist movement now? How strong is it? And what is the degree of collaboration that you have?
No, that's another very interesting question, because when we think of nationalism on the level of, let's say, European sense of nationalism, when we think of it on St. Martin, for example, let's take the French part. Political parties claim they are aligned with the parties in France, but in reality, it's like every party locally, it's very personal, it's a small culture where everyone knows everyone. So there may be affiliations to bodies outside, but in reality in St. Martin, those are superficial, because what is more important is the sense of Caribbeanness, is the sense of oneness. And this is the reason why we we founded the One St. Martin Association because that would be more nationalistic if there's such a thing. And in terms of saying in St. Martin, the people are historically one people. That is the nation. So whether they're French or Dutch, they're historically, culturally one people with two different and sometimes multi nationalities, right? So some St. Martiners may have both French and Dutch nationalities. Some have one, some have three, American or other nationalities. But in reality, the indigenous or the traditional St. Martiner, as we would refer to ourselves, they're one people. So in my particular family, for example, I have nieces and nephews that have French nationality, nieces and nephews that have, they all live in the same home. You can be a French national and go to school on the Dutch side, and you can work on the French side and live on the Dutch side and vice versa, etc. So those things are there at the administrative level. But if there's anything to be called nationalism, it would be more at the level of the St. Martin identity in terms of we are one people historically, culturally. We are one people. And so there's affiliation to Curacao. I was born in Curacao, for example. And so you have family in those other islands as well. But the affinity to Curacao, for example, traditionally and culturally, in St. Martin, you would find quicker a cultural affinity to Anguilla, for example, or St. Kitts and Nevis because of our history, right? Even though we are bound together in this Dutch kingdom and would have developed over time a relationship. So it's very fluid. There are no borders that we mark and say this is where it goes. It's very fluid. And it's the makeup of the St. Martin cultural fabric.
I'm not sure I get the sense that there is a nationalist movement. What is driving the nationalism if there is not a nationalist movement? I'm not sure I get that. Could you clarify that?
I hear people use the term here, and I tend to say, the rigid definition that you hear outside don't always apply to us, right? They hardly ever do. So people pick up the terminology. But when we speak in St. Martin of the nation, it is that 37 square mile of rock, right? That's the nation. Everything else is secondary. But now, in the last 10, 20 years, you'd see a bigger drive to enforce Frenchness and Dutchness, where the seat of power used to be Willemstad in Curacao for the Netherlands Antilles and Bastia in Guadeloupe for the French territories. Since their new status in 2007, the French part, and our new status in 2010, you would think we would become more progressively self-serving, self-sufficient towards independence. But what you're seeing is a bigger push from the metropole to have more control on the rock. And so there's often friction with groups like our organization, One St. Martin, and in terms of the direction that we think that the island ought to be heading.
Okay, I want to bring in my colleague here, but I think it's obligatory on my part to ask you about reparations and how, the reparations movement conjoin with the decolonization movement. Could you talk to that a little bit, and then Renee would take the questions after that.
Yes, sir. So One St. Martin, our organization, we became an associate member of CARICOM Reparations Commission. We had petitioned for years to become a member because at the government level, our government was not doing this. The colony does not want to engage in a discussion on reparations. And so we had to seek membership through our NGO status. And in that conversation, now fast forward, there was the Dutch apology last year. Actually, the year before, when the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands apologized because he was forced to. And then the Dutch King also apologized on July 1st, 2023, saying that there would be no discussion of reparations. They would apologize, and the idea is that they would put some money available for commemoration and projects, and you could apply and get funding for a few €1,000 to do your projects, but that there would be no discussion of reparations. And we had said to our premier, referred here to as the Prime Minister, to not accept that apology on our behalf as descendants of enslaved Africans, to say to the Dutch Prime Minister and to the Dutch King, we're not accepting an apology that makes no commitment to reparations. And so there has been no official acceptance or rejection of the apology, but we are working with the CRC, with CARICOM, in terms of trying to get an official CARICOM response to the Dutch apology. And so we were consulted for our position on the issue. We stated very clearly that we didn't think the apology was a full apology. It was a formal apology, but it was not a full apology as CARICOM requires, because there was no discussion of reparations or commitment to non-repetition because of what we see happening on the ground where we live in this colony. While we are apologizing, we are bringing in more colonial structures, stronger colonial, control of our borders, of our way of life. Everything is becoming even more colonized as opposed to more freedom and self-governance.
Okay, so Renee, you can pose your questions now.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fergus. I was actually going to ask Dr. Arundel about the reparations movement, and specifically about the Dutch apology that has been deemed inadequate. Has One St. Martin in particular, have you all used that apology as a way to levy or justify and just support your demand for independence?
Well, yes, that's exactly, well, even beyond that, what we did, we issued an official rejection of the apology. So immediately thereafter, we said we're not accepting it. It's dishonorable to our ancestors. That was the first step. And then what we also, so we demanded, first we had demanded that the king apologize, because they were saying that the king would not apologize, but he did. And then we said that if there is no discussion of reparations, how about we ask, because we've been calling for a referendum for independence for a while now, and we have always stated that reparations forms part of our independence package, right? Yes, and that's part of our discussion. We have issued what we believe is a claim, an official claim, where we think, using the CARICOM 10-point action plan, we've created our own 15-point plan that we believe should form part of our reparations conversation, our goodbye package as we move towards independence. We're not taken seriously, obviously, by the Dutch state, but we're working with CARICOM, and we're doing our work, and we're hoping, now that there's been a new election, it will probably not happen in the next 4 years, because every time we look at the parties that make up the governing coalition, and there has been no move by any of the parties in the past 10 years, 12 years to honor a request for a referendum. And so we're pushing for that. We don't think the parliament will come out and declare independence, which they have the right to do. So they're not doing that. And so we are pushing for a referendum.
And what is the general sentiment of the public? Because I know you said that of recent years, there's this kind of push from the Dutch kingdom or the Netherlands kingdom of, Dutch, and reaffirming their culture and their identity. But what is the general sentiment of people from St. Martin about seeking independence, or do they prefer to be a colony because of the perceived benefits of still being aligned to the Dutch?
We've had in the days of the Netherlands Antilles 2 referendum, right? One was in 1994, and then the other one was in 2000. So our last referendum was 24 years ago. What the politicians often use is to say the people chose the current status and they do not want independence. But that was 24 years ago. They use this statement that the people don't want it, but we don't know because we've not consulted the people. To say that the people don't or do want, there are quite a number of people that have been, pro-independence. To what extent, we don't know, because there's a very vocal minority that tries to speak on behalf of the majority. And what we're saying is that if you are certain that the people do not want independence, just table the referendum and you'll know for certain if that is the case, right?
That is still the case.
Right. That's our argument, and we're sticking to that, because if you within 6 years' time could have 2 referendum on a separate status for this island, apart from the Netherlands Antilles, why after 24 years can't we have a referendum on independence? And for us, that's the logical route. Now, like I said, the parliament can, with the majority, also declare that St. Martin wishes to become independent, but I don't see any of the politicians doing that. No.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Dr. Further.
Yes, so I want to take the discussion a little bit more on sort of a personal level. Dr. Arundel, you were Minister of Education under the UPDP. We know the importance of education in the colonization of our people, the colonization of the mind, the use of language, but particularly the content of the education system. We heard from Shabaka earlier how some apparently very educated people are still so much in love with the colonial value system. So, as education minister, were you in any way, driven to do something through your portfolio to ensure that the schools teach a more decolonized education content, or move in that direction? Would there any? Did you attempt it first, or did you want to attempt something like that and got pushed back? What impact did you have as a minister on the decolonization process through education, and perhaps the other affiliated portfolios linked to that, if any at all? Could you speak to that?
First, let me say that government lasted 18 months because we were toppled for some of the policies precisely of what you're referring to. But here's the even sweeter part, I should say. So in the election last Monday, I participated with a brand new party, which is a more pro-independence leaning party that was just created about 6-7 weeks ago. And we managed to capture a seat of the 15 seats. And we had campaigned on the education portfolio, right? We had campaigned on electoral reform, and education has very strong suits. And we were pursuing that ministry. And we were invited to form the government. We only got 1 seat in the election, but we were invited to form part of the government. And we requested the Ministry of Education for the same reason as you're outlining there. And it was not granted. We were the minority so we will be part of the governing, we are invited to be part of the governing coalition, but we do not get to manage the education ministry or portfolio. And from my perspective, it is precisely because of that sense of fear, number one, that we are a little too radical or a little too anti-colonial. and we had campaign on some. So it's to be seen what is going to happen in St. Martin in the coming days, because the government has not yet formed. And then in the next 4 years, what happens with that portfolio, right? How does that translate? What we do know, after I'd left office, and why I said the Dutch is more adamant about the they say recolonization, but I don't say recolonization because they've not really left. It's an ongoing colonization period. And so there's this thing, there was a report in terms of the evaluation of the education system done by, or at least spearheaded by, the Dutch government. And it does conclude, like we do, that the education system is in shambles. But the solution that they're proposing is totally the opposite to what I would propose, what we would propose, because it's more colonial. It's more, bring more Dutch language in, bring more Dutch structures in, and bring the education system, in particular, our University of St. Martin, to be now aligned with and under the umbrella of the Ministry of Education in the Netherlands, away from where we had been going with partnerships in the region, University of the West Indies, University of the Virgin Islands, etc. There's now signed agreements with the previous government that the government of St. Martin is going to pursue this direction for education reform, and it is aligning a lot more with the Netherlands. So
okay, great. Yes, great. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Can conclude.
No, I'm saying it's to be seen what happens in the next few years with education.
Yes. So just because I'm a historian, and of course you also are in the history from this Caribbean Studies Association, you must be doing a lot of history as well. What kind of history is taught in the school system? Is it geared to understanding the history of the Caribbean, or more the history of the Netherlands and the Netherlands in the Caribbean? What is it like?
All of the above. We have in the 16 square miles of Dutch territory, we have an American system of education, Canadian system of education, Caribbean system of, so we do have CXC schools here, European system of education. And in the CXC schools, these are schools that we've had to fought to have English as language of instruction in our schools over the years. And these are following the CXC Caribbean Examination Council, their curriculum. And in there's the Caribbean history, right? There is part of that there. In the schools that are using Dutch as language of instruction, it's very little. When I was in school, it was like a page and a half, if you were lucky, in the history book, and it covered the entire Netherlands, Antilles, and so much Caribbean. It is very little, and there's no effort to change that. You may find things like what is the capital of these islands and what is their production, their economy, etc. That's about it. But the real Caribbean history, we would not have gotten. I did not get at school, but I would learn that when I would go to the US. And now in the Caribbean Council, the schools that are taking the Caribbean Council examinations, they're getting a bit more of that. But it's also very limited.
Yeah, okay. So we are at the top of the hour, and 91.1 FM would be leaving us in a couple of seconds. So we want to thank the listeners on 91.1 for being with us this evening, and we hope to see you again next week at our next edition of Indaba. Dr. Aridel, could you just give us your last word for this evening and let us know, while you're doing that, what's next on the agenda of the decolonization process, or what is the hope for going forward with decolonization as we wrap up?
As we wrap up, I want to thank you and your team again for this opportunity to share our work with your wider audience. For us, we're not giving up the fight for decolonization. We have, similar to your program here, we have a weekly radio program, the UNIAACL-EACL, where we try to share with our audience the Caribbean, what's happening in the Caribbean, what's happening around the world with regards to decolonization and independence movement. What we are also doing, like I said, we're working with CARICOM, with the CRC, and we have recently reached out, been invited by the Baku Initiative Group, which is working on decolonization around the world. And we've been to 2 of their sessions, and we're going to be collaborating with them for further support in our decolonization effort. For us in One St. Martin, the job doesn't finish until, number one, we're an independent sovereign state, but also until we become fully integrated within the CARICOM family. We believe that we belong in the CARICOM family as a fully integrated member. And because we believe we have a lot to contribute to regional development, and we want to be at that table in a meaningful way, in a more meaningful way. So that's our aim as One SXM, One St. Martin.
Thank you very much for being with us this evening, and surely we are going to invite you again sometime in the future, and we hope that you are with us again to continue the discussion on decolonization until independence. The struggle continues. We want to thank our listeners, our viewers online, live, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Rene, for debuting as a co-host this evening. Our brother Shabaka en route to all my guests. Thanks for joining us, taking some time to join us. And of course, in studio, Nelly, I believe we have in studio. Thank you very much. See you again next week on Indaba, the program where knowledge grows. Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. Give us a like, subscribe to this YouTube channel and Facebook. Give us a like, subscribe. We need to grow the channel as well, and only you can do it. So thank you. Good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you are. See you next week. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.